right, great. So let us begin with our chalice lighting. And I could not find a lighter, so we're going to use the virtual worship web chalice, and it is lit. So since this topic this evening is on Christianity, we pulled a verse from our esteemed guest speaker this evening from Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all in one, or for you are all one in Jesus Christ. All right, so again, thank you for joining us for our first session in Neighboring Faiths. Our esteemed guest speaker this evening is Dorie Griggs, Master of Divinity. So Dorie is a mom, a fire department chaplain, a registry chaplain, and a Facebook community builder, not necessarily in that order. Dorie Griggs began her interfaith work after seminary as the producer of the cable television show Faith and the City Forum, Interfaith dialogue on civic issues. As a seminarian at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, Dorie developed a model of chaplaincy to journalists who cover traumatic events. She later volunteered with the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma and participated in a series of meetings at the Carter Center's Rosalind Carter Mental Health Journalism Program. Her work supporting journalists and the parents of Citadel cadets earned her CTS's 2014 Pioneer in Ministry Award. A year later, as a chaplain resident at the Atlanta VA Medical Center, Dorie won a Daisy Foundation Award for her work with a team in the hospital's surgical intensive care unit. Her work building online communities for parents of cadets, the Citadel, caught the attention of Facebook's corporate offices, and she was invited to be a participant in the 2017 Facebook Communities Summit in Chicago. Currently, Dorie is the chaplain for the Roswell Fire Department in Roswell, Georgia, and a registry chaplain, PRN, or as needed, for Emory St. Joseph's Hospital in Atlanta. In addition, she works for the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Atlanta as a project manager. And a native of Sparta, New Jersey, Dorie is a 1981 graduate of the University of Richmond and graduated from Columbia Theological Seminary in 2002. She currently lives in Roswell, Georgia with her husband, a photographer, Stanley Leary, and the couple have 3 adult children. So please welcome our esteemed guest, and we're so thankful to have you with us, Dorie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we came up with some questions for you, Dorie, and I want to kick us off with just asking you, what are the core beliefs or tenets of your faith and tradition, including your beliefs about God and the afterlife?
Yeah, and before I get started, I'll mention that I come from a particular place on the landscape. There are over 3,000 Christian denominations. I grew up as Presbyterian, and I'm commissioned, ordained, and endorsed with the Federation of Christian Ministries. So I'll try to answer in broad brushstrokes and not just from my perspective. I think it'll be helpful to understand where there are differences. Basically, Christians believe in Jesus Christ, with that as being the Lord and Savior, someone who came, God who came to earth to be with us. Now, once I say that, there's always exceptions to rules. It's kind of like learning the English language, because we're a conglomeration of all these different things. As soon as you come up with a rule, there's an exception to the rule. I have a friend who's a oneness Pentecostal member, and that means they don't believe in the Trinity of God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus. They believe in God, and there's one God, and all those other names that other Christians have for God, they're just one. So, but she's a Christian too. So in general, the vast majority believe in a Trinitarian God. It's not three different gods. My Muslim friends will say it sounds like tritheism to them, that you have three gods, but it's basically a concept of, there are different ways to put it. Like there's water, there's steam, and there's ice, but it's all the same thing. It's all H2O. That's the more scientific bent on how to explain the Trinity of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. My personal belief, I relate closest to the Holy Spirit part of the Trinity, that God's around you all the time and you can meet God through other people. But that's my personal view. Sometimes I tell people it's more like a kind of the Force and Star Wars kind of feeling. That that's how I relate to God, is an unseen presence. And I'm also a person that believes I know I don't know everything, and I don't have to have the answers, and I'm more comfortable in the gray. So where there are some Christian denominations that have set, you have to believe in this, this, and this and you have to do this, this, and this to be part of our particular congregation. In the Presbyterian Church, we value education and we value questioning. There's a saying that goes, we're reformed and reforming, meaning God's always speaking. So you're always having to revisit things you thought were one way and now it's another. So the different denominations all came from where they found their authority. For centuries, it was one church, it was the Catholic Church, run by popes, a series of hierarchical male leaders. And then during the Reformation, I don't know if you've heard of Martin Luther, but he was a Catholic monk and read the Bible and decided that the way the Catholic Church was doing things for centuries wasn't exactly following what he saw in the Bible. So he didn't mean to start another denomination, but that's what happened. And that's why churches formed after the Reformation, or like Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists are a little bit later, Baptists are even younger than the other denominations. And they all started splitting on where they found authority. Some people, it's the Bible alone, and they call it sola scriptura. The authority is in the Bible, and each person is empowered to read the Bible and see how it speaks to them. Then in my tradition, you have creeds that came about. Creeds were basically the meeting of the church leaders when there was a controversy with, do we believe this or that? So they'd have these conferences, the councils, and the religious leaders would all get together, and then they'd come up with a statement and decide what they believe. And in the Presbyterian Church, we have the Book of Confessions, which is basically a historical document that says, back in the 300s, this is what the Council of Nicaea said, and this is what the next council said. And there's a statement from 1969 that's one of the more recent ones. So it doesn't have more precedence over the Bible, but if you're going to stack things up, it's like the Bible's on top, and then the Book of Confessions would go under that, and then the polity, the rules of the church. And Presbyterians are all about decently and in order, follow Robert's Rules of Order. The Constitution of the United States was based on the Presbyterian system of representative government. That's how a Presbyterian denomination is set up, so that not one person's voice, that the pastor doesn't overrule the congregation members, which isn't the case in every denomination, where you have a hierarchical structure of, like, if you have a bishop in the Methodist Church and the Episcopal churches, so you have a bishop and different levels of ordination past that. and they have more authority to make rules and not make rules. Those Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Lutheran are all what are called connectional churches, which means there is a governing body and the governing body owns the property and is the main place they oversee everything. Then you've got churches like the United Church of Christ and Baptist churches, which are congregational, which means they own their own property. They make their decisions. Like the Baptist church in my town can have different ways they do things from the Baptist church from the next town over, because each church can decide for themselves about their leadership in decision making. So when it comes to the I'm looking at revisiting the question that you asked, that I started rambling on after. But the beliefs about God and the afterlife, God and Jesus and the Trinity is probably the overarching main theme in all Christian churches. Afterlife, that'll vary. I'm from New Jersey. And it wasn't until I moved to the South that I had somebody ask me if I was saved. I don't know if any of you have ever had someone ask you that question, but I just kind of looked at it, didn't know what they were talking about, because in my tradition, Jesus died on the cross, and that was the saving grace for all of us. It is in my tradition, but in some traditions, like my husband grew up in Southern Baptist church, it was more of you have to make a statement of faith as an adult, and they call it the age of consent. And then, and at that point you claim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and then you're baptized, and they call it believer's baptism, which is basically a dying to sin. You're either dipped in water, those are the ones are dunked, and then some people are sprinkled. And the people who are sprinkled tend to be babies. Everybody claims a biblical base for what they do. The people that baptize infants look at the Bible, and at a certain point in the early Christian church, the father of the family would become a Christian, and then the whole family would become Christian, babies through adults. And the people who believe in what's called believer's baptism, that tend to be the Baptist, in other, like a lot of non-denominational churches are that way too, believe that you need to make a statement as an adult and make a decision to live your life in a Christian manner and then be baptized. So that's one of the major life passages. And in a lot of churches, they have what's called a confirmation class. You grow up in a Sunday school environment, a classroom environment. And with the little ones, it's, as my Christian education professor said, when you're really little, under 5, there are two things. He said, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, Jesus loves me. And that's basically what they can handle. And just that God is love and we care for each other. And that's what you stay with the children. And you start telling Bible stories at an age appropriate level. And then later on, you delve deeper into the Bible and the church history side of things. And then somewhere around age of 13, like middle school age, you have a confirmation class in a lot of Protestant denominations where you study your own denomination and beliefs, and sometimes get a smattering of other churches, so you know you're not the only ones out there. And then at the end, they make it in the Presbyterian church, the student makes a decision to either join the church or not join the church. I have 3 kids. My oldest son, when he didn't want to join the church. And I told him that was fine. It goes against what I believe, but you need to go to the classes because you need to know what you don't believe as much as you need to know what you do believe. So he went through the confirmation class, and then at the end was the only one of 30 students that did not join the church. I happened to be the student pastor at the time, and I heard that it caused some feathers in the congregation, but when everyone else after the church service, when they join the church, parents take their kids out for lunch, the grandparents are there, and there's a big celebration. Well, I took my son out to celebrate. It was his first adult decision in the church to not join the church. So I was going to affirm his decision and celebrate that. So I didn't want him to think that there was no problem as far as I'm concerned, because it goes against what I believe to make a child make a statement that they don't feel is right. So that's pretty much, you can get into other things. The Catholic Church would be a class all on its own on what they believe. They have more sacraments. In the Presbyterian Church, it's communion is the main sacrament, and baptism. Yeah, but in the Catholic Church, marriage is a sacrament, and there's several others.
You started touching on the second question, and I think that's probably why you went that direction with how you educate your congregation along their lifespan. So you've kind of hit on that already. What is the focus of study with adults? Like after your confirmation, what kind of studies do you do with adults, if that's applicable? Or
Yeah, well, that'll vary on the congregation what they offer. There's a saying in church leadership that the bigger the church, the smaller you have to get. So if you have a congregation like North Point Community Church, I don't know if anyone's familiar with how huge they are, but a Sunday morning is like the busiest shopping day at the mall as far as parking goes. It's just this huge parking lot, and they've got tons of people, and it's just, I don't even have numbers for how many people go on a Sunday, but it's huge. But they have a very, very active small group setting where if you're want to join the church, you commit to joining a small group and meet with them. You go to the church service on Sunday, but then you commit to another day of the week to get together with a small group of about 10, 12 people and study. In just about all Christian churches, you've got Bible studies, and then there's usually a theme. Some churches will have the theme. The class I belong to at Roswell Presbyterian Church is called the Think class, because we just we'll pick topics, and somebody from the class, we don't have just one teacher, different people volunteer to lead the discussion on different topics. We've done everything from they rewrote the 10 Commandments one time. And just a lot of social justice things we'll discuss, and church history. Other classes are Bible study specific, like taking certain books of the Bible one at a time and study. Others are based on age or family situation, like parents of young children will have a Sunday school class. At our church is large enough that you have a whole lot of smaller Sunday school classes. But it varies as much with your imagination as far as what a class could be about. But you generally have a Bible study, you have kind of a church history sort of discussion class, and then some others based on themes, or maybe a particular book is out and they'll study that book.
yeah, I could imagine that that question was going to be kind of really broad on the type of response that you could provide. So thank you for just kind of giving us some ideas. And also, I wanted to commend you on being a great role model to your son and teaching him that, like, you don't have to do this. So I just thought that was pretty admirable. The next question that we had come up with, what are common misconceptions about your faith?
Well, that's an interesting one. I kind of laughed when I read that, because there's some things that I would say is not Christian at all, but someone across the way would say, well, that's exactly who we are. Because I have a very, what's called in church circles, an open and affirming faith system, which means God can call whomever God pleases to ministry. In a lot of the denominations and Protestant denominations, the question of ordaining gay and lesbian people were really big. It has been big for the past 20, 30 years. And part of the reason I'm commissioned and endorsed by the Federation of Christian Ministries is they are very open and affirming and inclusive, and they encourage interfaith dialogue. So I didn't have to compromise any of my beliefs to take ordination vows. The Presbyterian Church has, and they do now, there are provisions to ordain people in the LGBTQAI plus community. But it still depends on the area of country and what presbytery you're in and so forth. And it just didn't feel right to me to take ordination vows with my fingers crossed behind my back saying, yes, I'll uphold this except for this. So I didn't have to compromise my views and with the Federation of Christian Ministries. So that's where my ordination comes from. You'll have some people that are anti-abortion, and they'll take on what can be seen as political views and say it's their Christian faith is driving it. But then you've got people who, especially like in the United Church of Christ, they're very active in social justice, and they have an outreach to young women who need an abortion, and they'll escort them. That's what they do, and they're Christian too. So it's hard to say the misconceptions, because sometimes they're true. They're small-minded, discriminatory, not open, and not loving at all is how they come across. And in some cases, I'd agree with those, that it doesn't come across that way. You'd probably be able to ask me questions and I could say more. It's hard to know what misconceptions people have, and because they're lived experiences. I've talked to people who are not church members anymore, who were really hurt by their congregation, and it took them a while to find a home. They felt like they wanted to find a home, but it took a while to find someplace because they were hurt from wherever they came from.
I mean, I'll make this personal. So you mentioned that you have a different point of view than most Christians, or not most, but other Christians towards gay and lesbian people. That was my story, though. What you just shared just now is that I was hurt by my Nazarene congregation as soon as they found out I was gay, and I put found out in quotes because I don't know why I put it in quotes, but they found out I was gay and they just threw me away. And, I grew up singing in that church. I sang solos on that stage all through my life since I was like a year and a half old. I was very active in that church. I played my trumpet in the orchestra, and as soon as they found out I was gay, it was like, oh, you're not part of this family anymore. And that really hurt me. And I walked away thinking I would never probably walk back into a church again until I found this congregation, which blew me away. In 2018, I didn't even realize that Unitarian Universalists exist before that. But yeah, so I relate to what you were just saying about being hurt by a congregation in the past and not really knowing a path forward.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are gay, lesbian, trans, that are all very faithful people, and some are leading congregations, but they have their own hurtful stories and journeys and pathways. And I mentioned United Church of Christ the most because they were on the early end of being affirming in ordaining people who felt called regardless of who they were. And, I've heard some really horrible stories, and people claiming that it was because they were Christian that they acted that way, and that goes against my belief. And fortunately, I have found a good number of people that believe as I do and are open and affirming. And the Presbyterian Church fortunately has come around. It's taken them about 20 years because I graduated in 2002, and now it's finally more affirming. I had someone tell me when I left the ordination process of the Presbyterian Church, I said, well, you're just about 10, 15 years ahead of where the church is right now. We'll get there. And I couldn't see it at the time, and I didn't need to sit around and wait. So I left the ordination process. I still worshiped at the church, my congregation, but a lot of good progress has been made, I think, in several different denominations as far as inclusivity goes.
It's amazing to hear, and something I didn't really realize. So I'm learning tonight along with all of you. If anyone else has any misconceptions that you think of as you think of Christianity, feel free to put those into the chat. And that was kind of a broad question, a little bit hard to answer, unless you have a more pointed misconception to discuss. So if anyone has anything like that, feel free to put it in the chat. But Bill mentioned that he said, can you comment on the growth of the evangelical Protestant churches? You mentioned North Point, and he said that he's attended services at Buckhead Church and Passion Church, which have huge congregations like North Point, which I looked up, and they have 38,000 attendees across 8 locations in North Georgia, which is a lot. But he said, how do you, as a mainstream Protestant minister, look at the growth of these non-traditional congregations?
It's been interesting. I think, and even within the evangelicals, you've got a broad spectrum of beliefs. But people like Andy Stanley, who gets his hair cut by the same person who cuts my hair, by the way. I run into Andy Stanley in the salon. I've attended there just because I had friends that it means a lot to them, their worship there, and I wanted to experience it. And it's more like going to a rock concert vibe. There's just a lot of people, and the music is there, and you're on your feet a lot with music at the beginning. And then it's more like a conversation when the minister gets up, and when Andy Stanley gets up and talks, is more like kind of an address to your friends, conversational tone to it, instead of a more traditional thing. He's in just a shirt and slacks and very casual. So a lot of people like his message and the way it's framed. North Point and some of the other churches you mentioned are what they call high commitment churches. So the dynamic with them, they'll have more worship attendance numbers are higher than their membership numbers, where in the majority of other churches, your membership numbers are really high and your worship numbers are lower than who's physically there, or virtually now with all the Zoom worship. But the high commitment churches are like, you can't join North Point without joining a small group and committing to the meeting with that small group every week. And there's certain other things that you agree to do. And some people are just looking for that stability when everything else is out of control, and change has happened so quickly in the past 20 years. Technology, when you think about from when I started seminary in 1995, it took me 7 years to get a 3-year degree. A lot of life in there. I tell people God had me on the 1 day at a time plan. So just a lot of life happened that made it stretch out longer. But just in that 7-year period, the technology and computers and the use of computers, and we were still handing in written papers. You didn't email them to your professors when I was in seminary, and that's unheard of now. You either email it or put it on a flash drive, do something electronically with your papers. So in the midst of that vast change, a lot of people gravitated towards what they saw as real concrete answers, in the sense of, this is right, this is wrong, and this is what you do, and this is how you do it. And they needed that structure. And that's been my observation with some people that are drawn to faith systems that give you answers. If you have questions, this is what you do. The looser you get with the answers, and the more abstract, that's hard for some people to deal with.
I realize I'm on mute. So I was looking at some other questions that we might ask, since I'm not getting any in the chat. And you mentioned something before this call that I think would be interesting to talk about. So how important is it to you to reach non-believers and bring them into your faith? Because I asked that one because it kind of relates to my childhood. I used to help my mom with the bus ministry, and I feel like my church was so focused on bring people in, bring people in, bring people in, right? And we would go through all parts of town and put flyers on every door on Saturdays to try to get people to come on Sunday. So I just thought I'd ask you that question.
Yeah, and that will depend on the denomination you come from and the history behind that. In my belief system, in the Presbyterian church, it's more of you live the life, you aspire to do better, and doing better and emulating the way Christ lived his life, and meeting people where they are, then people would gravitate towards wanting to be around you more. So it's more of a subtle evangelism. It's more meeting the need in the community. Like, well, my church at Roswell Pres, we have a lot of outreach within Roswell itself. We have someone on staff who is fluent in Spanish, because we have a heavy Hispanic population in Roswell, and works with the community's Spanish-speaking families come in. There's after-school programs in apartment complexes and so forth. And a lot of those people don't go to our church, but it's an outreach to, you see a need and you just meet it. And some people do end up coming to the church as a result. That's a little different than I know when in a different neighborhood I lived in, some church like an hour away would send a bus to our neighborhood to pick up kids and take them to their church. There's all kinds of wrong things about, in my mind, taking a person in a bus and just, hey kids, come on, come with me an hour away to church, without your parents. But that's what they felt like they were supposed to do. There are some people, my daughter went to Columbus State University and is in the theater, and you've got a lot of creative people there. And she grew up in the church. And this is another end of the spectrum. My elder son, who decided he didn't join the church. My youngest daughter joined the church. And in college, she's decided she's Wiccan. And she's a practicing witch. And people that she's in school with that are more of the evangelical bent think that, I'm sure they have prayer services to pray for her soul, because they're so nervous. My own sister-in-laws, who are more evangelical, grew up in the Baptist church, pray for both my oldest son and my youngest for their souls. They're just fine. They know what they believe, and they know they're comfortable with where they are. But people that come from an evangelical standpoint will believe it's their duty to bring someone to Christ. in the Presbyterian way of thinking, you don't bring Christ to anyone. God is already with everyone. We don't bring God into places. And that's how I believe. And that's pretty much a Presbyterian belief. You go and meet people where they are, and God's already there working. But an evangelical take some verses from the Bible and feel it's their duty to make disciples of people. And that comes into how you read it. When part of my training is reading Greek and Hebrew in the original text, and the original text is far more broad and open and inclusive than church history has made it seem.
So somebody mentioned we tend to group all Christians together, but could you speak more to the growth of the vast number of interpretations and denominations or types of Christianity in the US versus Europe?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with Europe. I spent a month in Eastern Europe when I was in seminary. So the Czech Republic and Hungary specifically, and they're like 2% of the population is religious in Czech Republic. And in Hungary, we were guests of the Reformed Church in Hungary. So that's my limited firsthand knowledge over there. In the United States, right now there's a big shakeup in the United Methodist Church over ordaining and affirming gay and lesbian people in marriage, same-sex marriage and so forth. It is splitting the church apart. And that's pretty much how some denominations historically happened in Europe. Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists were in England. And it all came from how they viewed communion was a big thing in the Catholic Church. Celebrating communion, Lord's Supper, Eucharist, it's all the different names for the same thing, where Christ, before he died, gathered his disciples and they had the Last Supper, and he broke bread and they drank wine, and he said, "This is my body, eat it, do this in remembrance of me," and same with the wine. And in the Catholic Church, they believe that basically the wafer that you have in the wine is actually the body and blood of Christ, that there's a mystery around that we don't fully understand, but it actually happens. Then other denominations said, no, it's not actually, it's symbolic of the body and blood. So that's historically how a lot of the larger, older Protestant denominations started. And then you get into the United States, and in the 1800s, certain churches like the Methodists grew wildly throughout the country because a 16-year-old could feel the call to preach and stand up and start preaching, and then they were a minister. In the Presbyterian and Episcopal churches where education was primary, I mean, the tests to get to be a pastor were harder than the SATs. Really, you had to know geography, you had this test on just about every major discipline at a university that a pastor had to pass. For Presbyterian, and I know Episcopal priests had to do the same thing. So those denominations didn't grow as quickly as the Methodists and the Baptists. And then you've got some churches that split over the carpet color. Has less to do with theology. It was somebody wanted to have one architectural something in the church, and then other faction didn't want that. So then they ended up forming their own church. So you've got historic reasons and theological reasons, and then you've got the more surfacey things that there's a disagreement. The congregational church is split quicker. the ones that are connectional, you can't make a change in your own church. You have to go through, like in our church is a member of the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta that is part of the bigger General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. So it takes longer to make a decision. And some would say that believe that system is good, it's not always a good idea to make a quick decision. Sometimes you should think about things more, and that this system of going through several layers helps everyone kind of cool heads, and it's thoughtful and goes out and then builds consensus. Then in the congregational churches, someone can stand up and say, I think Pastor so-and-so needs to go. And then they call a meeting, and the pastor could be out on their ear if they take a vote and decide that. In the connectional churches, that could never happen because of the structure that's built in. So, but there is a joke that, and it's a lot of truth to it, that some churches split because of things like carpet color in the sanctuary.
We're building out a new location for our congregation now. So I think that is a funny joke considering what we're going through. And could you all imagine if that happened to us? So somebody asked, like, there, there was another question that popped up, so it threw me off. They're curious of how much leeway there is about individual concepts of God apart from Jesus being the Son of God. Are there a variety of concepts of the nature of God at all, or pretty standard?
Yeah, you'll find a wide variety, and within each denomination too, to some degree. There's something in the polity book. For polity is just a fancy word for church rules and guidelines. But in the Presbyterian Church, there's something, it's old language and it's very gender specific to men. So there are occasions when men of good faith will have disagreements, and in those cases, mutual forbearance is called for. Basically acknowledging that there are going to be situations that we're not all going to agree. And in those cases, we all need to just agree to disagree, is another way to say it. So in the majority of churches are like that. I've seen what my friends who are Episcopalians go through to be ordained, and I thought the Presbyterian system, we have written exams in the Presbyterian Church, and then you meet with committees and you do a lot of reflecting and writing papers. And I didn't think, I never felt called to a local congregation. And I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and take the exams. If I don't pass them, then I know that's not what I'm supposed to do. And then I passed all 4 of them the first time. It's kind of like a CPA exam where you can pass 1 or 2 and then you have to retake some others. Well, some friends of mine who were like straight A's and got all these scholarships didn't pass the ordination exams. And here I am. It's like, oh, I guess I'll take it and see what happens. And then I passed them. It's like, now what? So I probably stayed in the ordination process in the Presbyterian Church longer than I probably should have, because I never felt really called to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church. I knew I was called, but I stayed in longer just because those things that you should take as affirmation that you're doing what you're supposed to do, like passing all 4 exams. But there are other, like Baptists. If I grew up in a Baptist church, I felt called as a woman in the 90s. The Southern Baptist Convention changed from Baptists originally, like over 100 years ago, were the most liberal of the Christian denominations, because they believed the believers could read the Bible and see what it said to them. You didn't have any other authority. It was only the Bible, and they believed in the priesthood of believers. Like everyone who was Christian in Baptist could read the Bible and discern what God says through the Bible. So this is a pretty open and broad thing. And then over the past 100 years, and specifically in the 90s, there was a intentional takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention by a more conservative group of people. And my husband, growing up in the Baptist church, and he's a photographer, and was a photographer with the Southern Baptist Convention on the floor, and saw people have mics turned off when they knew they were going to speak against the more conservative people, the more overused terms, but the more liberal people got up to speak, and they turned their mics off so they couldn't speak against the group that wanted to take over. So you have very human things happening in every church, in power struggles and so forth. So you've got one of my professors in seminary said, you have one foot in the ideal and then one foot in the reality of we're fallible human beings. And you live in that tension between both of them.
There was a question about how important are missionaries to different Christian faiths?
The way missions have been done has changed just about every denomination that I know of. You've got the cruel things that would happen to the Native Americans in this country by people who, if you ask them, they're well-meaning Christian people. They thought they were doing what they were supposed to do by taking these children and indoctrinating them and cutting their hair and making them wear Western clothing and so forth. So that model of mission pretty much went away a while ago to now where it's more going into communities that need help and helping them help themselves. You still have mission teams of people going because that's how you get the excitement and the funding that the people that they're going to help need. But really the most effective way is to help people help themselves by providing education, or our church funds a school for nurses in Kenya. We have a few people that lived here for a while. They're from Kenya and went back to their communities in Nakuru, Kenya, and we fund a nursing school so people that live in that community can learn nursing skills to help in the hospital. So that's more of the missions that my denomination does. My husband covers mission work a lot with his photography. He travels around the world, and it's, what is it, the ABWE, Association of Baptists for World Evangelism, based in Pennsylvania, hires him, and he's literally gone all over the world for a week at a time, and he teaches visual storytelling to people who want to do mission work. And just about all those missions, there's a few people that live there, but they're helping train the people of that community how to help themselves.
Somebody said, are Mormons and Christian Scientists generally considered Christians?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask a Mormon, they'd say they're Christians. Yeah, and there's a lot of very good things about the Mormon faith. They're very family centric and support each other, and but there's a lot of Christians who mainline Protestant denominations who look at Mormons as more of a cult. I've heard that said. I tend to not lump people, me personally, into one group, but yeah, they have the Book of Mormon, but they also have the Bible that they refer to. With Mormons, Christian Scientists, was that the other one?
Yeah.
They're considered Christians, but they have their own particular beliefs too. Working in a hospital setting like I work in, you've also got the Jehovah's Witness group that as a chaplain, they don't, if you have a Jehovah's Witness patient, they don't want me to pray with them. They'll only pray with another brother or sister from their denomination. And they view their interpretation of the Bible as the only right one. Church of Christ is like that as well, which is different than the United Church of Christ. Let's see, this is my left hand. These are way over here. And the Church of Christ is way over here. The Church of Christ also, they're very conservative in the way they believe, and believe that they've got the right interpretation, in the way that they do worship is the most biblically based way to worship.
I remember when I was a teenager, I went with my friend to a Church of God, and then they spoke in tongues, but the Nazarenes don't believe in speaking in tongues. And I was just so confused as to why these two Christian religions like have such different beliefs.
Yeah, and if you ask each, they all base it on biblical principles, and will lift up certain segments of the Bible over others. That's where you get the speaking in tongues. So snake handling churches. You've got Jimmy Carter brought his Atlanta project to the retreat center where I worked at one point, and his security detail was at lunch with some of us that worked at the retreat center, and they were talking about going up to the North Georgia mountains, and there was a snake handling church that they were visiting, and they based that on certain parts of the scripture that they read and privileged that part and make it more important in their practice. So it's always interesting when people say that I go to this church because they do things biblically. Well, every church, every Christian church will tell you that what they do and why they do it is based on the Bible, but it depends on what part they're privileging. And I had a Greek professor, Greek words, and it works for Hebrew too, the more ancient languages, one word can have several different meanings. And I remember somebody asking Dr. Merritt, and he had a real Southern accent. And I said, well, how do you know if this word means this or this? And he said, well, it depends upon the context. You have to read the paragraphs before and the paragraphs after, and then look at it and discern what it means. And when he's talking about read the paragraphs before and after, he's talking about reading the Greek and see what the consistent translation is. And that's why I said, having learned both those languages and reading the text in the original language is far more open and broad and inclusive than our Western readings to the English interpretations. Any English language Bible is both a translation and an interpretation. The committee of people have decided what those things that could go one way or the other. A committee will discern and decide one way. So it's an interpretation and a translation. So if you really want to know what the Bible says, go to the original language.
We only have like 3 more minutes left. I was going to ask, is there any last minute thoughts that you would like to share with us about, Christianity or your personal beliefs, or anything that you think would be important for us to cover that maybe we didn't ask?
No, if you have questions, I'm always open to answering. Feel free to share my email with anyone. I'd be happy to be in dialogue. I always encourage people to read on your own, make your own decisions. But if you need some reading material or places to find more information, I'm happy to help with that.
I just put your email in the chat. because I didn't get to all the questions that were in the chat. We got some good ones in there, and I was just trying to pull out some good ones. Maybe in this last 2 minutes, then there was one that said, it sounds like your view of God being in all of us and in nature is pretty close to what many Unitarian Universalists would say. Have you done any thinking about how our principles and sources compare with your Christian faith? Or if you know what we mean by our sources.
Yeah, I've done some reading. I have some friends who are UU in leadership and have also wrestled. It wouldn't take much for me to become UU. I don't think. So I guess I don't know enough. I haven't done enough recent reading to be able to say where I agree and so forth. But I do have a deep appreciation for the UU churches. Like,
Well,
like I said to you before, I've been to a few services around the Atlanta area over the years. So
well, we would love to have you join us sometime.
Yeah, that would be fun.
We really appreciate you this evening, and just really thank you for kicking off this series with us, Dory. So I think we can all give you a round of applause for joining us this evening and really having a wonderful conversation. It was more than I expected personally, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you. So I'd like to bring our time to a close with this reading, with this quote from Nelson Mandela. It says, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead." So I think that's a beautiful quote that you sent over, Dory. Thank you for sharing those readings with me. And I will extinguish my virtual chalice. Oh, I slid it over again. There we go. And we can stop the recording. And before everyone parts, Carrie's going to post a quick poll. It's just a quick 3-question poll. So if you would mind, everyone, please answer that poll. She will launch it now. And while she's getting that going, great. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please join us again next week for our next session on neighboring faiths.